me talk in more detail about the epithelial tissue classification. Broadly, I mentioned in the PowerPoint about the characteristic. In any single tissue that you need to approach and how to study, you have to be very clear in define which is the function, which is the location, which one are the characteristic of the tissue. I took the time to break down the epithelial tissue, the same thing I'm going to do with the connective tissue, because these two tissues have certain complexities that the other one, they do not. In general talking, the epithelial tissue, we talk about the location. And if you remember in the PowerPoint, I didn't mention, it's a broad general idea about the location of the epithelial tissue. And in physiology, the epithelial tissue has a crucial importance because all the main physiological movements are happening within or through the epithelial tissue. So, let's talk about the function of the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue can be defined in two major functions. Is the tissue used to diffuse molecules through this tissue or exchange molecules through this tissue by election, by far comparing with the other tissues. And the other important function of the epithelial tissue is protection. Now, if we talk about the characteristics are unique because I took the time to write down over here some of the most important characteristics. The extracellular space is very, very tiny. The cells are packed between each other. There are pretty much no space in between the cells, like is more characteristic for the other tissues, any of the other three tissues. But in the epithelial, and if you can imagine, the protection can be achieved because they are packed between each other. So the extracellular space is really very tiny. It exists, but it's very, very tiny. And on the top of everything, that epithelial cells are attached between each other and they are reinforced between each other with structures that help them to keep close together. And if you just think about the epidermis, that is the outer layer of the skin, is the one that obviously is represent the most clear sample of protection, but through the classification you will find out that this function, protection, is developed in any type of epithelial tissue. The other characteristic is polarity. Polarity is defined because we have the cells that always have, regardless the shape of the cells, the cells always has a polarity, means that they have a basement of the cell that is facing the underlying tissue or towards the inner part of our body, and they have an apical area that is facing the lumen. It's very important to you to realize that the lumen of the epithelial cells are always facing the lumen or the external environment. In case of the epidermis, that lumen doesn't exist because that epithelial cells in the surface are exposed to the external environment. But except for this type, all the other ones are facing the lumen. If we are talking inside the heart, these ones are epithelial cells. The inner layer of the heart wall is the endometrium, and the endometrium, these ones are the same in the vessels, are endothelial cells, or the one that are lining the gallbladder, or the one that are lining the urinary bladder, the tissue, the epithelial tissue that is lining the respiratory tract, or the gastrointestinal tract, and the list is on and on and on, is always epithelial tissue, but the apical area of that cells are facing the lumen. The lumen is that empty space in that organs that can be, or most of the time is filled with a fluid or a substance. Now, the other characteristic is cellularity. Cellularity is when you watch under the microscope any type of epithelial tissues, you see the cells that are packed between each other. They are not a space in between each other, and this one is called cellularity. And another typical unique characteristic of epithelial tissue that doesn't apply for any other of the the other three basic tissues is avascularity. Means that any epithelial tissue doesn't have irrigation. Now, without irrigation, the cells die. Regardless which one is the cell, without irrigation, without blood supply, the cells die. I mean, some can last longer than the other one, but definitely all the cells die at a certain point. Now, how the irrigation is coming in the epithelial tissue is always coming from the tissue underneath that is always connective tissue. When you have an epithelial tissue in your body, regardless which one is the location, regardless which one is the organ, there are always underneath the epithelial, there is always a connective. You cannot attach epithelial directly with muscular or epithelial directly with a neural tissue. There is no possible way. So the only way is that additional tissue that is not a coincidence, that is called connective, because they connect two different tissues. Now, with this explanation, I want to insist the two broad classification of the epithelial tissue. One broad classification is made in the number of layers. The number of layers could be only one or could be more than one. If it is only one, it's simple. If it is more than one, it's stratified. What is the difference between each other? Well, could be the same cell shape or type, but certainly the function is different. When you have a simple epithelial, only one layer, regardless the type, is a tissue used by excellence to produce exchange of molecules. Could be by diffusion or could be by active mechanism, but is always using the epithelial tissue to exchange molecules, is going back and forth through the cell membrane. Now, in a stratified, when you have any type of a stratified, is a tissue selected to produce protection because they have more than one layer. Even when it's very thin, that adding layers is adding the possibility to be damaged. Any simple epithelial is really very delicate and is located in areas that they can perform the function without damaging the structure. In an stratified is always in location where they are exposed to abrasion. For example, our palms, our soles, our entire epidermis, the vagina, the esophagus, the anus canal. In any of these areas, that tissue is exposed. The oral pharynx also. That's why I mentioned the esophagus or the oral pharynx. They are leaning by stratified epithelia. And in all these cases, these areas are exposed to abrasion by friction, and because of that they have obviously they are more vulnerable to be shed off. But when we have several layers, we can protect the inner layers. Another important consideration about the epithelial tissue is the tissue that has the highest rate of cell division. Regardless what type, This epithelial tissue is the tissue that has the highest rate of cell division. We can rank it between the highest cell division, that is the epithelial tissue, with no cell division at all, that is the neural tissue. The other classification about epithelial tissue is classify the epithelial tissue based on the cell shape. And we have three types of shape. The squamous, that is like a scale in the fish, is still, they have apical area and basement area, but is really very flat comparing with the other one. Squamous, cuboidal, that is pretty much like a cube, and columnar that are elongated. Obviously, flatter is that epithelial cells more exchange of molecules can produce. That one is a fact. Longer or thicker is that cell, is the exchange, it takes longer to be produced, but certainly is way faster when it's simple than when it is stratified. Now, let's talk about the two samples, and the book organized the tissue in the epithelial tissue, connective tissue, in different ways that I frankly try to clarify for you guys. It's the same thing I've been doing for years when I talk anatomy. But this organization, I encourage everybody to copy and reproduce it by yourself. Challenge yourself. Keep the page down and challenge yourself how much you can remember in terms of classification, the names, the location of those, and so far. Probably the first time you have to be check and correct. But until you are not able to reproduce the whole graphic, you don't know about the tissue. Believe me or not, but if I were you, I will use it. From previous students and previous experience, you can read the students' feedback. There are several of them. I just finished to collect the feedback from the spring 20 semester, and all of them are encourage you exactly what I'm saying right now. Now, in the classification, I used to organize the tissues in the type of cells and the two kind of number of layers. So in that way, I use the simple squamous and stratified squamous, simple cuboidal and stratified cuboidal, and the same thing for columnar. Let's go for simple squamous. Simple squamous is the most delicate tissue by far in our body, no doubt about it. And it's tremendously important if the tissue is used in order to produce exchange of gases mainly, but because it's probably you remember from previous classes about diffusion. A diffusion happens through the cell membrane, and the molecules move from higher concentration to lower concentration. And this one is the case where you can find a simple squamous. Just bring your memory back from anatomy. Simple squamous is typically found in the alveoli wall. The alveoli is the little chamber that we counted by billions of them in each lung. Is the little chamber that has a circular shape when it's inflated, when we inhale, but it's in that alveoli that we can intake oxygen, and we use the same alveoli to dump carbon dioxide to be exhaled out. Now, alveoli is one, but the other one, very clear sample of a simple squamous, is in any single capillary in our body. Any kind of capillary, the continuous, the fenestrated, discontinuous capillaries, glomerulus capillaries, any kind of capillaries are made by simple squamous. And these, there are two actions that take place in the simple squamous. One is diffusion, the other one is filtration. Pure diffusion is used in the alveoli, and in the regular or any type of capillaries in our body are used to produce filtration and diffusion. The other type of squamous is a stratified squamous. And I try to remember, about the simple squamous. If you remember the serous membrane, the one that are wrapping the lungs, any single lung, your heart, the pericardium, the pleura, these one are serous membrane. And the serous membrane are made by two layers of simple squamous epithelium. But also the peritoneum. The peritoneum is another serous membrane that is wrapping most, not all, but most of the abdominal organs inside. And these one are made by simple squamous, but there are two layers. In the alveoli and capillaries is only one layer. The stratified squamous, again, is a tissue. When it's stratified, is located in areas where there is a high exposure to friction. These can be found, one of the samples within the epidermis, simple stratified squamous within the epidermis, and try to get back with the epidermis because it's a stratified squamous epithelium, but it's keratinized. And in your book, you read, and I have to write down over here, that the simple squamous could be keratinized or non-keratinized. This one is important for you to understand. In that epidermis, we have special epithelial cells called keratinocytes, and the keratinocytes produce keratin. Now, if that stratified squamous contain the keratinocytes, that is the case of the epidermis, they produce keratin, and the function of that keratin is produce impermeability of that skin to the water. So if I go to the swimming pool to take a bath in the swimming pool, or I take a bath in my tub, after a certain period of time, I don't emerge like I'm a bubble, right? Filled with water. And it's because we have keratin that doesn't allow to absorb water. We can absorb a little bit, but just a tiny mini is considered pretty much none, is regulated. That this one is the function of the keratin. Hair is pure keratin, and is the reason why you have so many hair care products that contain keratin in these days, because it's a protein, and like any other protein, we lose the capability, when we age, we lose the capability to produce the same amount of protein. So more keratin, thicker is the hair, less keratin, thinner is the hair. And it's the difference between when your grandma was 20 years younger and right now, or including, I can compare with myself, that my hair when I was in my 30s was way stronger and thicker, and right now is way thinner than it used to be. That is the process of aging. We can minimize, but sooner or later we got it. Anyway, so this one is the stratified squamous epidermis that contain keratin, or is keratinocyte. But we have certain amount of stratified squamous that I mentioned, like for example in your esophagus. In your esophagus, in your oral cavity, even in your nasal cavity, around your sinus, the paranasal sinus, even in your intestinal tract. I would avoid the intestinal tract, sorry, because that doesn't belong to other classification. But in the esophagus, the oral cavity, the vagina, the anus canal, that areas are leaning by stratified squamous non-keratinizide. And it's non-keratinizide because basically we don't need keratin in this place. But are the one that produce that mucous membrane is really pretty much related to the mucous membrane, and we have different type of mucous membrane. Some of them I just mentioned right now. So mucus they have embedded in that epithelial, in between epithelial cells, they have embedded the goblet cells that produce mucosity. Jumping in the next classification for epithelial, we have the cuboidal shape, and we have the two types, the simple and stratified. The simple cuboidal, obviously the shape is more like a square, like a cube. And the simple cuboidal, and you will listen on and on and on, especially in chapter 17 when we go through the urinary system and in detail about the nephron, that is the functional unit of the urinary system. Now, that nephron has two areas. Again, from anatomy, you know, and I encourage everybody, if you don't remember, go back to your anatomy book, because the nephron is composed by two areas. One that is like a bead that is called the renal corpuscle, and the other parts are tubes with different shape and with different twists. That nephron tubes are made specifically by simple cuboidal. Now, that simple cuboidal in the nephron tubes, they have different apical shape according with the function. So in histology, we mentioned that we understand the function of this tissue based on that, specifically for the epithelial tissue, based on the apical area of the cells, because that apical area could be totally flat. The apical could be totally flat, or could be with elongation that I had it before, that are called the villi. When we have villi in any single epithelial cells, that villi are used to increase the absorption area. Now, after said that, let's jump into the stratified cuboidal. Stratified cuboidal, very common place where you can find it. That's why location is so diverse between all the types of epithelial tissue. Stratified cuboidal is very clearly found in the exocrine glands ducts. That one is the place where you can find it. And again, remember that epithelial tissue is the tissue that made all our exocrine glands. You name it, could be the lacrimal, the ceramides, the sweat glands, the sebaceous glands, the salival glands. What else? I forgot something. Well, if I forgot something, please forgive me. But certainly all the exocrine glands, the one that produce a product and is eliminated outside the body, they use a duct in order to eliminate the product, whatever. The mammary glands, that's why. Because the mammary glands are the one that has that particular, the mammary ducts, used to eliminate the milk. But important about the glands, because I mentioned about the sweat glands, and sweat glands are distributed all over the body, but we have two types of sweat glands, the ecrine and the apocrine. The apocrine are located specifically in your armpits, in your groin area, the joint between the lower limbs with the trunk. The groin area is called also inguinal area, and all around the external genitalia and the anus. In these areas, we have the apocrine sweat glands, and these sweat glands produce odor. On the contrary, the ecrine glands, sweat glands, are the ones that are distributed all over your body, from head, the scalp, the chest, the back, your thighs, you name it, except in the areas that you find the apocrine. And these other eccrine glands doesn't produce odor. So it's the difference, and it's pretty much about that particular dogs, that how they are made and how they are eliminated. So these one are the two types of cuboidal, the simple and the stratified. Next one, we have the simple or stratified columnar. The simple columnar, again, I make the shape that could be a columnar shape with the basement area and the apical area. And that simple columnar very clear found in the gastrointestinal area, GI tract. The gastrointestinal area, starting from the stomach, not esophagus, stomach down, all the tract, the GI tract is leaning by simple columnar. But the difference between the different areas, we are talking about the stomach, the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, the colon, that apical area is different and is the one that will dictate or will tell you the type of function that is taking place at this area. So in the jejunum, we have really a large amount of that villi and also microvilli. If we are talking about the stomach, it's totally flat. So it's very common find over there, and certainly in that area, in the stomach, but mainly in the jejunum, that is the second part of the small intestine. Yes, the small intestine is made by the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, the three areas of the small intestine. The duodenum is used to mix the pancreatic juices with the chyme coming from the stomach. The jejunum is the one that is, the function is the maximum absorption of nutrients that we intake through the food. And it's in the jejunum when you have that large amount of villi and microvilli. And certainly is the areas where there is the highest amount of absorption. Now, if we are talking about the stratified columnar, it's very rare, very rare. Pretty much the only place where you can find that type of tissue is in the male urethra. The male urethra is the one that is coming from, is originated in the urinary bladder for males, going through the middle of the prostate gland and running in the middle of the penis. And is used by the reproductive and the urinary system. But this urethra is leaning by a stratified columnar epithelium. Now, I mentioned in the PowerPoint that there are two types of epithelial tissue that cannot be classified in any of those specifically. One of them is the pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Pseudostratified ciliated columnar is a very specific epithelial tissue that has, these one are the villi. The villi is extension of the cell membrane and they are fixed, they cannot move. But the cilia are like brushes. They are extension of the cell membrane, but they are like brushes and they move like the algae in the ocean in this way. So where we can find the pseudostratified ciliated columnar? Very common in your trachea and in your bronchus. They are also found, that pseudostratified ciliated columnar, in another areas in our body, but I want to be focused on this one because at the time we go to the respiratory system, we will talk about the function of these different organs. And yes, not only conduct, allow air to go through, but also they have a very important function that is protection. Because if we inhale a pathogen or a debris or a dust, between the cilia that are moving and the goblet cells that produce mucosity in that epithelial tissue, between together they are wrapping or trapping that foreign molecule, and could be a pathogen, yes, could be a virus, or could be a bacteria, or could be something else. They trap it between the mucosity, and with the cilia they are moving that product to the throat. When it's in the throat, we can swallow it, and when it's swallowed, is trapped in the stomach, and the acidity of the stomach kill or destroy that foreign molecule. Could be a toxin, could be a virus, bacteria, a fungus, a parasite, or you name it, or also could be a dust. And the other option obviously is spit it out. But certainly the function is protection. The other type of epithelial tissue is the transitional. The transitional that is mainly located, obviously, the transitional is always related to the urinary system. Why? Because it's mainly located in the urinary bladder and the ureters. No urethra, in the ureters. Now, why is transitional? Because it depends if that structures, the urinary bladder or the ureters, are filled with urine, are distended, and obviously we cannot take a sample of that tissue because the patient is alive, correct? But when it's removed from the urine, or the urine is taken out, and you take a sample of that tissue, is looking that is stratified and a special shape, because towards the lumen they have the shape like it's a peacock, totally different than the stratified squamous epithelium. The stratified squamous epithelium towards the lumen or towards the external environment looks totally flat. And I think I covered everything. Now, the next video I'm going to develop same thing for the connective tissue. I hope this one will help you way more in understanding how to classify the epithelial tissue and how to determine location, function, and characteristic of them.